So thank you so much, Kat, for joining us, and we're really excited to learn about the amazing sharks you get to study. So I'm gonna let you take over.
Thank you so much, Gillian, and thank you everyone for your patience. As Gillian said, I'm in South Africa, and sometimes our South African internet can be a little bit tricky, so I'm not quite sure what happened there, but the good old turn off and turn back on seem to have worked. So I'm just going to switch over to my PowerPoint now.
Yeah, you should be able to just the screen share. Let's see if it's gonna go.
Can you see it?
No, so when you hit the little green thing down at the bottom,
Yeah.
okay, there might be a bit of a delay. It should let you choose.
Okay.
It should let you choose which screen you want. So you got to select your.
Okay.
Yep, and go on that, and then it should come up.
Okay. Maybe there's a little delay.
Did you see like multiple screens asking which one you want to look at? Because usually if you hit screen share, it'll show you the different options, like what you want to share, and you're going to want to select your desktop.
Yeah, it just says screen, whiteboard, or iPhone, iPad.
Hit your screen. Yep. So select your screen. Double click on that. And now it's, but you have to open. Did you already open your presentation? Okay, we see your desktop now.
Yep.
Yep. So if you just go ahead, open your, there you go. And if you hit start, we'll be.
Yay, here we are. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the patience. Obviously, there is a bit of a delay in this. So, as Gillian said, my name is Kat Gledhill. I've been working with sharks for about over 15 years now, which is about as long as I've known Gillian. And today I'm going to be talking about a dive into South African shark biodiversity. So I've been working in South Africa for approximately 10 years now. And I've got a map here, so I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I live right down the bottom in the tip of Africa. However, I do a bit of work, and particularly with different collaborators, all throughout the Western Indian Ocean. So from South Africa up through Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, the Seychelles, Mauritius, and other beautiful places like that. So here in South Africa, we have an incredible shark biodiversity, and it's not just sharks, but also the rays and chimeras. So it's a biodiversity hotspot. There's over 210 different species of sharks, rays, and chimeras. As you probably heard throughout different presentations, we're always a little bit uncertain about exactly how many numbers there are, because there are constantly new species being described all the time. And also taxonomic changes. So I think we're up to about 250 different species now in not just South Africa, but the Western Indian Ocean area. So this comprises about 20% or a fifth of the world shark and ray biodiversity. And it's one of the top 3 biodiverse regions globally. So this animal probably needs no introduction. So South Africa is really known for many of the threatened iconic sharks, such as the great white. Obviously, it's a bit of a hotspot for great white sharks, but there are also many, many other species here that are just as important. So we've also got a ragged tooth shark, as they're called here, or grey nurses or sand tigers, depending on where you are in the world. So that's also a big ecotourism operation here, with lots of diving with these beautiful animals. However, there are also many other species that are just as vulnerable. So this species here is a Mako shark. Makos or Makos, depending on where you come from as well and how you pronounce it. Makos have just recently been assessed as endangered by the IUCN Shark Specialist Group, and they're one of the most commercially important species here in South Africa. They've also been listed on the Convention of the International Trade of Endangered Species. So here we've got a bit of a challenge currently where one of the most threatened sharks is also one of our biggest shark fisheries. However, there's also just as many different threatened sharks and rays here. So we've got little cat shark, a little cat shark in the corner, which is one of the species that I study. And then we have guitarfish or bowmouth guitarfish or shark rays, as they're called in other areas, and wedgefish and many other threatened species as well. So the reason that we have such incredible biodiversity here is you can see here, this is a map and it's a heat map. It's always moving. So this is just kind of a snapshot of one current time of the different currents that we have here in Southern Africa. So you can see on the east coast and north coast, you can see it's red. So it's a heat map. You can see all the way from going from blue is obviously the coldest to hottest being the red colouring, and the oranges in between. So you can see in the east coast and northeast coast particularly, we have a lot of warm currents. Then down towards the bottom, we've kind of got a mix of the cold and the warm. And then on the west coast, we've got cold waters. So this leads to many different sorts of habitats and different sorts of sharks and rays that live in these areas because of the different temperatures. So up in the north, as I said, that's where we have the warm currents. And so we've got a lot of species that live in tropical reefs. And so we have little reef sharks like these guys. And then down towards the bottom, we have cool temperate kelp forests. That's actually my friend Alison Cook, Dr. Alison Cook, who's also a shark scientist, swimming with a beautiful 7-gill or cow shark, which used to be a big ecotourism species here, but we don't seem to see them as much these days. And then we've also got some incredible deep sea alien sharks, as we like to call them. And this is a frilled shark, which I think is absolutely incredibly looking and also quite alien strange looking. And that's just a close-up of one there. So we really have all creatures, great and small. Again, here's another one of you'll always, anything I do, I'll feature a lot of cat sharks because I work with them and they're my favorites. So we have a cat shark here and also a spotted gully shark, and they're 2 endemic species of South Africa. So there was a global study that was done a few years ago by Nick Dolby and the IUCN Shark Specialist Group that estimated that around a quarter of sharks and rays are at threat of risk of extinction. Around half of them are also listed as data deficient, which means that we don't know enough about them to be able to adequately assess whether they're endangered or whether they're safe or anything like that. And in particular, we found that large-bodied nearshore species are at greater risk of extinction. So here in South Africa, I'm particularly interested in endemic species. So here in South Africa, we have roughly 30% or a third of all sharks and rays are endemic. And there's 2 main groups that we find that are endemic species, and these are the skates and my little babies, the cat sharks. And that means that because they live in such small areas and have really highly specific habitat and places that they live, means that they can be really vulnerable to human and environmental changes. It also means that we have global biodiversity responsibility to take care of these guys and make sure that we ensure their long-term survival. So there was a study that was done a few years ago by Davidson and Dolby, and this map here is again a sort of heat map, and what it's showing you is that Southeast Africa is an important conservation area for threatened, specifically endemic sharks and rays. So you can see along the coast of Brazil and also on the coast of South Africa and also Australia, where there's the red spots and the orange spots means that there are higher concentrations specifically of threatened, so endangered, critically endangered and vulnerable at risk of extinction, sharks and rays in these 3 hotspots. And as part of that study, they assessed whether if we put MPAs in specific areas, we could be protecting the hottest hotspots of threatened endemic sharks and rays. And so in this slide here, this figure here, you can see that if we put protected areas in South Africa and Mozambique, we could be protecting some of the most threatened species in the world, which are the little endemics. As I said, we're also a hotspot here for threatened endemic species, data deficient species, which means that we don't know enough about them to be able to accurately assess their conservation status. So we're one of the top 3 or 4 hotspots for data deficiency as well, which is sad in a way, but also really interesting for shark scientists like me, that we have a lot of work to do because we know very, very little about many of the species here. So we've got a lot of work to do. And unfortunately here in South Africa, we've also seen our first local extinction of a marine shark or ray. And it's a beautiful animal, one of my favorites, a sawfish. Gillian might remember, I was always obsessed in Bimini with these guys. I was lucky enough to tag a couple in my time there. However, these were first protected in 1997, and the last sawfish was seen in 1999. And they've now been assessed as regionally extinct in South Africa. So this is sort of the worst case scenario and what we don't want to do, leaving it, to just a year or 2 before we see the last animal. And unfortunately, the protection came in too late to be able to protect these species. So that's why we're really trying to work on trying to put in management and conservation strategies before we lose species, like we have with the sawfish in this region. So why are sharks vulnerable to population declines or at risk of extinction? So here I've got a picture of a typical bony fish or teleos fish, like the normal fish you're used to eating or seeing in the ocean. So you can see that big cloud around them. They do a thing called broadcast spawning, which means that they lay thousands and millions of eggs and sperm into the water all at once. And so there are many, many little fish that form and grow in these aggregations. So once the fish have an aggregation and a spawning event like this, lots of little larval fish will go off and hopefully settle safely into an ocean spot somewhere. And then with sharks and rays, we say that they're actually more similar to mammals like us, or sea mammals that you might be familiar with, like dolphins or or whales, other sea mammals, where they have only a few young that give birth every couple of years. So instead of several times a year putting out millions of fish into the ocean, might just be 1 or 2 sharks every couple of years, which means that you can guess from that unfortunately, if we see them fished, it takes a lot longer for them to recover from population declines. And not all sharks are caught just for eating. There's also a lot of bycatch, and what that means is, as I said, certainly some sharks are premier shark. They've got really good meat apparently, and they're caught specifically for eating. However, there's also bycatch, which means that some sharks are not the target species of different fisheries. You can see here, prawns is actually one of the most destructive fisheries that there is, because we're trying to catch such little small animals. They they trawl big nets along the ocean, and you can see that there's a little cat shark caught in amongst all these other crustaceans, and or crustaceans meaning prawns, crabs, and little animals that we eat for seafood. And they estimate that up to 90% of these fisheries are bycatch, meaning that they're animals that aren't caught. And unfortunately, not all of these animals are even used. So these animals are caught, not used, thrown overboard, so they're just dying for no reason, which is really a shame. The other picture that you see here is a typical longline system, which is used to catch tuna, for example. And you'll see that it's not just sharks, but there's a whole range of different animals, such as turtles and marine mammals like dolphins are also caught in these longline fisheries, even though they're not the target species like a tuna to be caught. So I'm just going to delve a little bit deeper, as I said, into my favorite species and the ones I work on here in South Africa. Excuse my spelling mistake, I just noticed. But most threatened species that were found in South Africa of cat sharks are the most threatened in the world, specifically for cat sharks. Usually they're deep water species and they're out of the way of many fisheries, so they're not really exploited or in interaction with human pressures as they are here in South Africa. You'll also notice that some of these are drawings. I've been working specifically on cat sharks for about 10 years here and searching for some species, and there are some that haven't been seen for at least 50 years. There are others that I've been able to find one record in the last 20 years of a species, which is coming up now, which is the Natal-Shire shark, which is the top of my bucket list that I've been trying to search for. Unfortunately, it's so vulnerable that we just are not finding it anymore. And these are a perfect example. As I was saying, they're not really fished for eating purposes. They're small. You can see with by the size of the scientist's hand here. However, because they're so small, they're often caught in different fisheries, like the trawl fisheries, as I was saying, also in lobster fisheries as well. They're often caught in the little lobster nets and again discarded and not used for eating purposes, but that doesn't mean that they're not at risk of extinction for those reasons. And this is just outside where I live now. This is my little friend Esther. And you can see here, you can see all the little brown bits poking out of the water here. That's beautiful little kelp forests. And a lot of the sharks that I work with, we actually find literally just off the rocks in the kelp forests there, which again, you can see by that how close they are to interacting with humans. It also means if we're changing the environment in terms of housing, pollution, all sorts of different factors like that, not just fisheries, they're also exposed to a lot of different human pressures. You can see here, this is just another example. You can see in my hand, maybe it's so tiny. I just circled it so you can see. That's a little puff-adder shy shark. It's another one of the species that I work with. We caught this one again just in the kelp. This is in Cape Town when I was working with Two Oceans Aquarium. So they're tiny little animals, and I'm not just picking up sharks for the sake of it, but I'm doing a genetic study at Stellenbosch University on all these different cat sharks. So we were tagging and taking a small little fin clip for genetic purposes, which is why I'm holding it just as I'm releasing it back into the environment where we found it. And this is another one of the small little baby sharks that I work with, a pajama shark. This is taken at the South African Shark Biodiversity that I do a lot of work with here in Hermanus in South Africa. And that's a cute little pajama shark that is named so because they have striped patterning that the scientists thought that they look like striped pajamas. It's very cute. So this little baby was actually just born into the lab there. So there are some little egg cases that I'll show you in just a moment. And we often have people that will come and find egg cases on the beach that have little live animals in them, or sometimes they call it in lobster traps or something like that. And we can actually hatch out the little cat sharks in the aquarium there. And they also do the same thing at Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town. So this is just a little example, again, not really condoning randomly picking up sharks, but because they're found so close to shore and they're actually quite hardy species, meaning that they can live in captivity because they sit on the bottom a lot. They don't swim around like a great white shark or a mako or something like that that needs to be swimming to be breathing. They're a really good educational tool to show children about sharks and teach them, just as in Bimini, Gillian and the Bimini Shark Lab do with the shark species there. And this is one of my favorite sharks, a little leopard cat shark. So you can see here, super cute, but that's actually an egg case. So just like you would find a chicken egg, these little cat sharks will grow in tiny little egg cases. Some are really honestly about this big. This one's a dark shy shark, so their egg cases are about that big. And you can see when the little baby shark is grown, or hatches I should say, when it's fully developed in an egg case, that it hatches out. Again, these are taken at the South African Shark Conservancy when we would just have the little shark nursery there of all the little baby cat sharks. So because they grow in egg cases, what we find, particularly where I live in South Africa, we find a lot of egg cases on the beach. And there are so many amazing citizen science programs all over the world. We have one here in South Africa where you can walk along the beach, and a lot of people are amazed when I show them for the first time. You can see that behind where I am with one of the colleagues that I was working with, you can see the kelp forest that's dried up. And these egg cases are amazingly camouflaged. They look so much like kelp. And as I said, people are really surprised when you show them an egg case, because they'll be walking along the beach and a lot of the time they actually think that it's a little bit of kelp on the beach, but in fact they're shark eggs. So this can give us some really great information about which species might be found in different areas. Cat sharks are predominantly what we find where I live, also occasionally some ray species. And we've also got a chimera or ghost shark egg case here. So one of, I saw that Britt Finiki gave a really great webinar as well on these amazing species. And we often find these on the beaches here in South Africa as well. So here's some of the local school kids. We often run egg case hunts with the kids, which is again another really fun thing to do to get people outside. Unfortunately, we're not allowed outside at the moment in South Africa on the beaches, but one day when we will be again, it's a really cool way to just get kids outside, teach them about sharks and provide some information. So really anyone can go and do this and contribute to these citizen science projects. And the Shark Trust in the UK also has an amazing program like this, and you can record information from wherever you are all over the world. So Sharks for Kids and Gillian made some really amazing, beautiful fact sheets and posters of some of our endemic species, which I'm really grateful for. As I said, this is another one of my favorites, puff-adder shy shark, one of the species I work on. And it's named, everyone always thinks it's a very strange name, but the reason it's called that is it has a very similar patterning to a puff-adder snake, which is also an endemic snake species here in South Africa. So that's why it's named so. They also have other funny common names. They're Haploblepharus species, which is the genus I work on, which is 4 different species in this genus, and they call them the happy sharks. So this is the pretty happy shark, which is also a cute way to remember their names too. But these guys are just absolutely stunning. And we've recently done an updated IUCN Red List assessment for this species, which will be coming out in June. So stay tuned for that, because there'll be some interesting information coming out too. So to put things in perspective, this is another really important graphic that shows you, again, a lot of the sharks that I work with aren't the great whites or tiger sharks or the species that most people are familiar with. Most of them really are these tiny little sharks. That's probably far more common as a shark than the large pelagic, big toothy species. And just to put it in perspective, they say that globally it's average of about 5 people have an incident with a shark or a shark bite per year. However, deers, cows, hippos, very relevant to Africa, hippos, jellyfish, ants, bees, all sorts of things actually are more likely to injure humans than sharks are. And in fact, we really are the predators. It's estimated that at least 100 million sharks every year are killed by humans, as I said, directly, sometimes for eating, and also just through different trawl fisheries, different long lines, different fisheries that are discarded at sea and often not even used as animal protein, which is really sad. So in fact, we really are the predators and not the sharks so much. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, which I think that people like you guys watching have a really good big role in changing the perceptions of sharks. So just to leave it how you can help, as I said, I really believe that particularly children and the upcoming generations have a lot that they can do to contribute to helping sharks. You can raise awareness about sharks simply by talking to your friends. I have 2 small daughters that actually want to come in a minute because they're very excited, but they always talk to their friends about sharks. I also get in trouble because of the restrictions we have in South Africa now. I usually will reuse our shopping bags, and I have to, at the moment, have plastic shopping bags, and I get in trouble because my daughter always tells me that using plastic is going to kill sharks. So you can make choices about different products that you use, such as plastic. You can also eat sustainable seafood. As I said, things like prawns are not always the most sustainable seafood, particularly for larger animals. And here in South Africa, we have a system called, you can see in the corner here, called SASSI, which is Sustainable Seafood Initiative, and it has like a traffic light system. So you can always check whether your fish or seafood product is sustainable. And there are similar initiatives all over the world. So if you're interested in different countries, you can certainly look into it, or please feel free to reach out to me. Report illegal activities. I think I've got a slide a little bit later on in this as well. A lot of the sharks that I work with, little cat sharks, are just left on the beach a lot of the time, which is really sad. As I said, they're caught by not just the lobster fisheries, but also recreational fishers who find them a little bit annoying because they're not the target species that they're trying to catch. So often they don't even release them alive, they'll just leave them on the beach, which I find very sad and a waste of life. There's also citizen science projects that you can participate in. As I said, those shark and ray egg case hunts are such an amazing example. There are also so many photograph citizen science projects, like for whale sharks or different species as well, if you're a diver when you're a little bit older, that you can participate in. And you can also support non-profit shark organizations. Sharks for Kids is such an amazing organization that you can support. Again, you can share resources, or you can make donations directly to these organizations, and they've got a lot of really cool interactive products that you can, and resources that you can download too. So here's just another example of another one of our key species, the Shortfin Mako Shark, which is another beautiful graphic that Gillian's put together, or the Sharks for Kids team has put together, to raise awareness about this species. And as I'm sure many of you know, there's lots of colouring in and great resources on the Sharks for Kids website that I recommend that you dive into and have a look at. And I really, really believe, as I said before, you guys are our future ocean stewards. It's up to you. You're going to be living on this earth a lot longer than we are, and it's up to you to protect our sharks for future generations and make sure that we have sharks left in the oceans when you become adults and when you have your own children. So I really encourage you to do what you can to protect sharks and share the love and awareness about these amazing species. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions. And also, if you want to reach out to me, I've got my email address here. And you can also find me at Kat Gledhill on Twitter and Instagram as well. Thank you.
Great. All right. So I'm going to let you, Kat, if you want to go ahead, and we can just leave that there for now. But thank you so much for all the amazing information. We have a lot of great questions, but if you guys are thinking of some more, please go ahead. Feel free to type them in the Q&A. I've answered quite a few during the session, just some general shark ones, but we have a few for you as well. And I think these animals are incredible, and we don't hear a lot about them. The smaller sharks are lesser known, and so videos, information, photos, and this research is really, really important. And I've talked a little bit about this with deep sea species as well, and protection is difficult if you don't actually know about the animal. And so learning about kind of their life history and where they go, what they do, is really, really important for conservation before it's too late. So yeah, really interesting stuff. All right, so we're going to start off with, you've mentioned something that you like, but do you have or can you name an actual favorite shark?
I have a few. Puff-adder shy shark and a leopard cat shark are my favorites. And then I also, which I haven't really got in my talk, wedgefish, or they call them giant guitar fish here, is another group that I work with that I really love too, and sawfish. It's very hard to narrow it down.
And there's so many, and as new species are discovered, or you discover, you find out about a new species, it's, then you kind of want to explore that one as well. So, all right. So do you have, let's see, Sydney wanted to know why, we've had quite a few people comment that they want to be marine biologists when they're older, which is awesome. Sydney wanted to know, why did you want to become a marine biologist?
That's a really good question. To be honest, I have had an interest in sharks and the ocean since I was a child. I grew up in Australia and I was always at the beach, and you can probably see I have a bit of a soft spot for egg cases, shark egg cases, and one of my first memories of being interested in sharks is the very cool Port Jackson shark eggs that I used to find on the beach, which are swirly shark eggs, and they got me really interested in sharks. So I went to university to study environmental science, and just throughout my university time and there onwards, I just really wanted to save sharks. There's a lot of attention these days on sharks, but when I was younger particularly, there really wasn't much conservation focus. So I really wanted to do what I can to help save these animals.
Cool. Conservations. All right. So Luke wanted to know, he said a couple of orcas came through the Cape and displaced some of the larger shark species like the white sharks. Did you see this change, create a change in the ecosystem or an impact on the smaller shark species that you've been talking about?
That's a good question. So Just to update everyone if you're not aware, so killer whales or orcas there are two in particular, two orcas that have been coming into South Africa, particularly around Cape Town and near where I live in Hansby, and now into Mossel Bay as well. So it's just two individual killer whales that are coming along, and it was suspected for a while, but what we've seen is that they're actually hunting great whites and also seven-gill sharks, and they making a little incision and taking their livers, and unfortunately the sharks are washing up and dying. And we've seen, it's quite sad, the shark tourism industry is really, really suffering around here because all the sharks get scared away by these orcas. So I don't think we've seen so much a difference, as far as I'm aware, on the smaller sharks, because they're certainly targeting the larger ones. But what's also interesting is I've been at sea and seen sea otters and different seals, taking the little cat sharks too. So they're definitely predated on by different animals, and also the larger sharks, because these guys are so small. Some of the larger sharks also eat them, unfortunately. Part of the food chain.
I think it's important. People oftentimes think sharks are the top of the food chain, and many species are, but certainly not all of them. And they play a vital role, no matter their size. But they're definitely not all these massive animals that control the food chain. So it's important to learn what role they actually play, especially with the smaller species. And that really goes back to conservation as well, learning about their particular role in an ecosystem to understand how to make conservation efforts more effective. So, very cool.
Absolutely.
We've had a couple people, including Thomas, ask what the most common species. Is there one that's the most common in South Africa, or a couple that everyone sees all the time?
Yeah, good question. So I guess, as I said, there are really different regions have really different, like, more common species. So the cat sharks that I work with, it's really interesting at the bottom tip of South Africa. We certainly find one species in particular, which is the dark shy shark, and they're everywhere, but then they're really rare in different areas. And then once you go up to the northeastern part of South Africa, there's ragged-tooth sharks, and more of the larger species that are found more up there. As I said, great whites used to be found a lot where I live, near where I live in Hansby and Cape Town. They're the largest aggregations in the world, but unfortunately we're not seeing them as much these days. So it really depends where you are, but they're some of the more common ones.
Yeah. Amber wanted to know if you're seeing any, because they're smaller, if there are any invasive species in the area that have come in that are affecting these sharks, or I'm not sure if you've seen that, or if that's something that you've kind of learned about, or if you guys it's making an impact.
That's really interesting. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not really aware of any invasive species. I mean, certainly we're seeing not so much invasive species, but we're definitely seeing a shift in distribution of kelp and there are like little mussels that are sort of, so we're seeing some of those are invasive, and we're actually seeing like a shift in that sharks are. So not directly associated with the sharks, but sometimes their habitat is changing a little bit along the coast.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about like the lionfish in the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean, and just what they've devastated. And it's scary what one invasive species can do and how far spread they can get in a very quick amount of time. So
yes,
yeah, we definitely do see it. We have a question too about are you finding that your research is kind of the local community is getting more involved and becoming more knowledgeable, and has this kind of shifted their views of sharks, or increased maybe shark and ray conservation efforts on a more local level? Oh, let's see.
Cut off just at the end there, but I heard, could you just repeat it again?
Yeah, no problem. So,
Sorry.
yeah, so are you finding by doing research there and some of the outreach that you've done, obviously with kids, are you finding that the local community is getting more involved and becoming more aware of what's happening, and maybe does that increase conservation efforts for sharks and rays?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question. And I certainly think it is. As I said, people often associate sharks with great whites and tiger sharks and know some of the larger species. And it's been really interesting seeing the shift towards particularly endemic species and some of the smaller ones that I work with. There's a lot of great organizations such as South African Shark Biodiversity and Two Oceans Aquarium that are also doing a lot of great awareness work too. So I definitely think that there has been a shift time, and certainly in the research community. When I first got here, most people working on white sharks, but there's definitely been a change not only in the research but also the conservation community too, on focusing on different species, and the public is far more engaged and getting involved too, especially with initiatives, as I said, like the shark and ray egg-based hunts as well.
Yeah, great. And I love that you included a lot of action items that kids can do and people can do to get involved, because sometimes it can seem really overwhelming. And even if you don't live near the ocean, there are so many things that you can do to be involved and to not only help sharks, but the oceans in general, from reusing. I know now people are struggling because plastic bags, that's what a lot of places are making people use because of the current global situation. But yeah, I think it's just important that whatever species we're talking about in oceans in general. So for kind of giving those pointers, I think it's really important. So, well, thank you so much for everyone who joined us and sent us some great questions. And I hope you guys are excited to learn about these little sharks. And thank you so much, Kat, for sharing all the knowledge and experience and about these amazing little animals that probably most people had never even heard of. So that's really, really incredible. And hopefully we have some shark advocates out there that are going to be rooting for the little guys and the diverse species. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone who joined. We did our best to answer as many questions as possible. Obviously, Kat's put her email up. If you have questions, feel free to contact us as well on the Sharks for Kids website. And make sure you stay tuned for more Jossum Shark webinars. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Thank you for all the work that you do. And thanks everyone for listening and bearing with our technological challenges.
Great. Thank you, guys. Everyone have a great day.